Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. We are back again with content that's a little bit different this time. I put out a community message last week about D&D's OGL license update, and honestly, I just put it out because I thought it'd be something interesting for you all to talk about a little bit. But hey, turns out quite a few of you are interested in it, and I didn't really understand at the time that this is something that could impact Pathfinder. So that made me say, you know what? Well, I should probably do a video on this and try to explain to people what's actually going on. But then I said to myself, I really don't understand what's going on. And instead of just having a video with me blabbing on and talk about things I don't really understand, I thought I'd take the opportunity to bring somebody onto the channel who does understand what's happening. So joining us today is Renfail, who actually has his own YouTube channel and has been using the license in his own personal life. So, Renfail, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my brother and I originally came up with this idea a couple years ago to kind of build a different type of game. We were going towards a point and click game. And if anybody who's been out there a long time who understands the backstory of like Dragonlance as an example, it started off as a tabletop world that then became a book series, which then became video games, and it spun off, and Dragonlance became this big thing. Forgotten Realms similar in the sense that it's a world first, book second, video games third. And we, in terms of looking at how we were going to bring that to fruition, there is a lot of groundwork that's been done by other companies, Pathfinder included. And we decided that we were gonna, if we're gonna go about that, we wanted to do it the way that other people had done it. So we said, rather than just build a point and click game, we need to have the setting first. So why don't we do a multifold project where we build the setting, which is that world map behind me, and then out of that setting, we can then have a point and click game, a book series, all these things that we do, and we do most of that through our Patreon, and my wife and I work with my brother on that, and then I have my personal channel where I do a lot of gaming like yourself, and I play a lot of CRPGs because I do keep my feet firmly grounded in that tabletop space. And
How are you using the license? What made you want to
okay, yeah.
use the
So
license for what you're doing?
so when we started looking at this, um, uh, all the things I've done, our first project was an MMORPG based on my world called the Saga of Lucemia, and that was something we worked on for about 7 years. And that started as a second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons campaign in the late 90s with some of my high school buddies. We all had a house
Hmm.
together, and we were all, 19, 20 years old. There may or may not have been a lot of substances imbibed while we were playing, but it was fun times, and that world spun up out of that. So my first initial homebrew rule set was based off of second edition, and everybody's kind of got their version of an edition that they like the most, and that's what I grew up with. So I started with that. And over the years, I had just refined that system. So when we sat down to do the current project that we're working on, which is called The Weave in the Void, we looked at it and said, well, if we're going to use a system, why don't we just use my homebrew system? Because that looks like it's going to be the easiest to do. However, when we started looking at the legalities of publishing a for profit product, then you start getting into legalities because TSR was famously notorious for being litigation happy and cracking down on any sort of third party. It didn't matter how remote they might be using something similar to what they had. Everything was product identity,
And
and
when you say
everybody was a
TSR,
threat.
you're referring to what?
Uh, I'm gonna forget the name now. The company that owned Dungeons and Dragons before Wizards of the Coast,
Got you. Okay,
and
cool.
I can't remember what it stands for now because it's I really can't. I feel stupid
Hmm.
now that I don't
But
remember that.
basically, the company before Hasbro.
Well, the company before Wizards of the Coast.
Okay.
So TSR owned Dungeons and Dragons, or Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, and everything before Wizards of the Coast came along. And when TSR was going through bankruptcy, Ryan Dancy, if I remember correctly, was one of the guys who spearheaded the buyout with Wizards of the Coast, and then that all that stuff transferred over to Wizards of the Coast. They became the owners of it.
Got you.
So when we were looking at how litigation happy TSR was, we then looked at Wizards of the Coast and said, well, they've done some good things, but they also seem to still be potentially litigation happy. So if we want to avoid any potential issues, what is everyone else doing? And we looked and said, oh, everyone is using the OGL, the open game license. Specifically, everyone was using either the original OGL tied to 3.5 edition, which is what Pathfinder is based off of, or they were using the fifth edition OGL,
Hmm.
which is the 1.0A. So there's 1.0 and 1.0A. 1.0 being as I'm not a lawyer, by the way, so any of this stuff
Hmm.
take it with a grain of salt because I am a business person who also has I have a rough understanding of legal stuff, but I'm not perfect, and everybody
Yeah,
should do their own due diligence. But
it's all
1.0,
good.
as I understand it, was 3.5, and 1.0A is the fifth edition. And we looked at that, and what really struck us was at the time we were putting it together, there were lots of products out there. Whether you're talking um, the Middle Earth. Um, Tabletop version. There's a tabletop book out there, the Middle Earth version. There's Star Wars books out there. There are, I know that War Chief Gaming, Chris Metzen, the guy who used to be with World of Warcraft, did
Hmm.
Ouroboros, a very successful tabletop campaign. You had Solasta, as an example, ran their
Hmm.
campaign for a SRD fifth edition video game, but also has a tabletop source book that's associated with that as, based off of the Kickstarter campaign. We
Yeah.
started looking at all of these companies. We were like, why are these companies not building their own rule sets? Why are they just using the OGL? And so we started looking at the OGL and we went, oh, well, they've made it really easy to say, hey, here's the most popular version of rules in the world that everyone knows and can play and easily adapt to. If we want to be able to get our product into the hands of as many people as possible without dealing with some weird rule sets that only 20 people play or only 2,000 people play, we should probably make it 5th edition aligned because that's going to allow us to sell the most amount of copies.
Hmm.
So it was really simple to just slap the 1.0A into your product, and then it's very clearly separated between what is um, the rules document, which is the SRD, and the OGL, the Open Game License. That stuff is very cut and dry. It's literally you can use anything that is like, as an example, any of the generic classes, fighter, barbarian, etc. Any of the spells, magic missile,
Hmm.
fireball, so on and so forth. All of that stuff is within the SRD and can be used or could be used previously. This is what's in flux right now under the OGL 1.0A is that all of
And
that
it can be used for
stuff
free.
could be used for free. All you had to do
Hmm.
was put a link, you had to copy and paste the OGL terms into your book somewhere, and you had to clearly define what was open content used from them and what was your unique product identity. For most cases, the reason people were using the OGL is because it's kind of like a copy and paste template of saying, here's these, I don't know how many there are. I'm going to make this up. There's 10
Hmm.
starter classes that you can use, and there's 500 spells, right? And
Hmm.
they all work within this D20 system, which cannot be copyrighted or trademarked. But their version of the system, you roll the D20, and this happens based on difficulty checks and all these things. So if you're familiar with the rules of Dungeons and Dragons, then you can very quickly and easily take that rule set, plug that template into your unique world, and then flesh out your lore around
Hmm.
that, create your own product identity, all your own unique original classes, all of your own unique magic systems, spell lists if you want that are supplemental to the open game content that comes with that license. But it's a very quick and easy way to create a product without needing to create your own unique class systems, your own unique spell lists, which can take a lot of time because
Right.
what's already built into that are things like not just the names, but also the casting components, the casting time, the range, the radius, the duration, how many targets does it affect? All of those things are built into that system, which makes it very easy to use if you're already familiar with that system, which is
So,
why it made that so easy to use.
S- So there was a leak that occurred last
Hmm.
week where some verbiage was released that seems like it's going to change how that license works in the very, very near future. So can you kind of give a breakdown of what that verbiage is and what it actually means?
So here's my understanding of things, and I would stress for everybody listening that Wizards has yet to confirm anything, but
Yes.
they have been hitting everybody with takedown strikes who has leaked the original leaked document. So that suggests that something there. But one
It's
thing that
at
has
least
been
it's somewhat
confirmed.
based in fact. Hmm.
Right, and there is one thing that has been confirmed, and that is the percentage of royalties that's going to be owed. The head of, I just recorded the video this morning, which is coming out tomorrow morning, on that actually. You've got the head of,
Kickstarter.
yeah, the head of Kickstarter has come out and
Hmm.
confirmed that. So essentially, what the leaked documentation shows, there's a lot of stuff at play here, but the most important is that about was it 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, there was a bunch of rumors flying around, and they came out on the D&D Beyond website and said, "Don't worry, the LGL is not going away. It's changing a
Hmm.
little bit. Here's the three most important things." And they said that if you use our licensing, you're going to have to report your product to us. You're going to have a creator badge associated with your product if you use our rules. If you make more than $50,000 a year, you must report that income to us. And if you make more than $750,000, you're going to owe us a royalty. Now, those three things didn't look that bad in the grand scheme of things,
Right.
until the leaked language came out. Because in that press release, they were talking about how some of the things that are going to be covered in the new OGL that were never covered in the original are like the minting and creation of NFTs for profit, and we don't want people out there exploiting our intellectual property and creating D&D focused NFTs. That's a legitimate, by the way, that is a legitimate thing you should protect if you have your own product identity. So I don't blame
Especially
them at all.
considering the way the majority of gamers seem to feel about NFTs. Like if it gets to the point where the D&D brand is considered to be associated directly with that, that could be a serious problem for them. So yeah, I agree.
Right. So what they're essentially looking to do is the market has changed in the 20 years since the original OGL was written, and they want to make sure that they can profit from as many of these new ways of merchandising that have sprung up since then, because originally the OGL was only going to be about books.
Hmm.
So the leaked language suggests that they're doing way more than just those three things. It also suggests that one of the things they're trying to do is they're trying to go back and say that all previous versions of the OGL are now illegitimate, and that anyone wanting to use any version of an OGL from before is going to be forced to use the new OGL, because the old OGLs are now invalid. And that's because when the original, and if you go through the terminology, one of the things they put into the new, or at least versus the leaked footage, the leaked language, is that they've put this terminology in there of irrevocable. Now
Hmm.
that's terminology that wasn't necessarily used in the original documentation, and that's what's terrifying a lot of people, because if it the argument is that if the old versions didn't say irrevocable, it did say in perpetuity, which the average layman is going to understand in perpetuity to mean perpetual, forever, but it also can be interpreted as until canceled. And this is where it's
Hmm.
going to come down to, interpretation is 9/10 of the law. And
Right.
there are going to be companies that end up going to court over this unless Wizard walks it back. But essentially, the leaked language says that they are trying to make the old OGLs invalid, and that anyone who wants to publish something with the OGL must use the new OGL. And along with the three things that they've already listed, the leaked language shows that and this is the most dangerous clause that has everyone upset with, is they have, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have it open in front of me, but they have a new clause in there that says that your content, you own it, but you can only publish it in certain places, which they allow. So they're going to
Hmm.
dictate to you where you can and can't publish, because again, they're trying to make sure that you can only publish in a book or PDF format. They do not want you profiting off of anything other than those two things, which means if you have something like I do with my brother and my wife, which is not only a tabletop book, but also a video game and also a book series, they're trying to say that you can't do these other things unless we give you permission. The second part of that same clause says that they have the right to take any third party content created under the OGL and they have a worldwide, perpetual, irrevocable right to use that content and publish it in the places that you can't in any way that they see fit, and they do not owe you royalties for any of it. And that right there is the clause that has most homebrew creators upset, because what they're trying to say is that anything that you create with our license, we own and have the right to use in any way that we see fit. So if you create the next Pathfinder, as an example, and that becomes really big and
Hmm.
popular, not only are they going to get to take a percentage from you for a revenue cut if you make more than $750,000, they're also going to have the right to use that material in any way, shape, or form that they see fit without ever paying you any royalties. So it's a very heavy handed, in favor of Wizards of the Coast. So that's the crux of the leaked language that has most people up in arms, on top of the fact that, and this is the thing that's been confirmed by the head of Kickstarter's gaming department, is that they are expecting a 25% revenue share for anybody making more than $750,000. And that is it's an astronomical sum when you consider, as an example, Epic Games with the Unreal license that they have. We can publish a game through Unreal, and they have a similar scenario where you can make up to $1 million before you owe royalties. After that point, you owe 12%. Okay, 12% is a chunk, but it's not
Hmm.
25%. So
Yeah.
I feel that I made an argument in the video that's coming out tomorrow talking about the percentages. Um, if you look at most people who have created something with the OGL probably only makes up 15 at most, like 10% to 15% of what they have with their homebrew. Look at Pathfinder as a perfect example, because I know that the
Hmm.
conversation will be winding towards Pathfinder eventually.
Hmm.
Pathfinder created a world using the OGL 1.0 for 3.5 edition, right? And they created a world. They had base classes and base spell lists that they pulled over, but then they have spent 20 years since then creating a huge amount of lore and world and other spells and other
That's
classes and
wholly separate from D&D.
right, it's product
Hmm.
identity. And if you separate that out, I would argue that most homebrew campaigns, or most third party products that have been published with as part of the OGL, I would say 85 to 90% of what's in those source books is product identity that's unique to the people who created it, whether it's the Middle Earth
Hmm.
Companion, the Ouroboros books, the Grim something, I forget the name of their it's an Australian company, and somebody told me the name of it yesterday, and I already forgot. But they've done like 3 Kickstarters for a source book, a player's handbook, a monster manual. Like, they've created this grim dark universe. Um,
Hmm.
there are all these companies who have published amazing materials, and if you look at their books, like 85 to 90% is stuff that's their world. It's their lore, their setting, their characters, their backgrounds, their magic system, their deity of the pantheon of gods. It has nothing to do with rules. And so the
Hmm.
idea that Wizards of the Coast, and more importantly Hasbro, thinks that they can take 25%, these are all the things that have people upset about this document that's been leaked. And
So
while,
I
we
think
don't have, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that was the interesting thing about really digging into this, because when I
Sure.
first saw the leak on Twitter, I was like, "Oh, this sounds terrible." But it sounds terrible in a way that's not really going to impact me, because I'm not playing tabletop D&D right now. So I was like, okay,
Correct.
this, yeah, and I'm not trying to create anything from the license. So when I first saw it, I was like, this sounds awful. I'm really sorry for the people who love D&D, but it's not impacting me personally. So let me move on with my day. Whereas when you actually look into it and you step back and think about the properties that you love that have used D&D in really any sort of fashion, they could really be impacted by it. But I mean, of course, a 25% revenue split, that's a huge deal. But to me, it's going to be just as damaging for Pazzo if Wizards of the Coast can start taking their characters and basically putting them out wherever they want to. Like, there are some characters that are specifically associated with Pathfinder, like Sela, for example, who's a huge part of the current game. The idea that Wizards of the Coast could just take Sela and try to reproduce her in some sort of other way to add more attention to what they're doing without paying Pazzo for that, simply because 5% of the Pathfinder world contains some D&D foundation, is kind of wild. It's wild to me that they would reach like this.
And this is the thing because nothing has been confirmed yet. So you have a lot of people saying that
Hmm.
it's pure speculation. But at the same time, looking at the fact that they've issued takedown notices against the language, it suggests that at least some of it's true. We've confirmed the royalty percentage, which
Right.
essentially, if they come out and this leaked language is correct, and they claim that all the previous versions of the OGL are now null and void, and anyone who wants to continue using the OGL must give them a royalty payment, that means that companies like Paizo are going to have to very and the the rumor is that they're only going to be giving people 30 days, which I would say that that's something that'll be argued in court because 30
Hmm.
days is not enough time for a big company to enact an entire rule set change. Like if Paizo were to say,
Right.
you know what, Wizards, you know, screw you. We don't want anything to do with your OGL. We're just going to go develop our own thing from scratch. That is
Hmm.
not a simple undertaking for a company with 20 years of history. It was easy for
Absolutely.
us because we have one source book and a prequel campaign, which only was level 1 to 4, and we're in the middle of working on the the next component of that, which we live streamed. That's being written right now, so it was
Hmm.
really easy to go back to a 120-page document and just strip out the SRD related open content stuff and just make it system agnostic. But when you have a company that's published 80 books over the last 20 years and they've done two different versions and they've done video games and miniatures and comics, I don't know what
Hmm.
else. I'm not huge into Pathfinder, so I'm not intimately familiar with them. But when you look at a company that's done, I mean, it was a better selling product than Dungeons and Dragons for several years, I think in the,
Hmm.
early 2000s. And again, I think when second edition came out, they've put out a lot of stuff, and they're not the only company that has done that over the years. So anybody that has ever published with the OGL would be facing a reality of, if this proves to be true, they would have to either choose to move away from the OGL, which means redesigning all of their content from scratch and coming up with their own rule set, or switching over to a different rule set. In both cases, you're talking, I mean, depending on the scope of the venture, you're talking anywhere from $100,000 to millions of dollars in salaries that have to be paid to people who are going to go out and create the new rules, get it edited, get it play tested, create the artwork, do all the things that have to be done. Um,
Do you
it's
think this
it's a
change?
scary thing.
Do you think this change will end up negatively impacting Critical Role? Like, I've
This is
never been a consistent watcher of them, but I know a lot of people on my channel are, and it
this is the
seems
funny
hard to
thing about
believe that
them.
it wouldn't affect them.
I think it will because, again, we haven't seen the final language, but considering one of the reasons they want to update the OGL, is because they want to tap into those resources of people making money off of miniatures, NFTs, any
Right.
plays, let's play, live play sessions,
Hmm.
cosplay, all of these things.
But Critical
Um,
Role has had such a big it's been such a big part in making D&D so
this is why
much
no one
larger. Like, I don't
understands.
see how they can justify trying to damage that.
And that's the thing a lot of people are curious about too, because it's like, if you look at Critical Role at its core, what is Critical Role? What's a homebrew? It is
Mhm.
literally their own world that started when they were playing privately as Pathfinder, and then they changed it to fifth edition when they went public. Everything they've done has been streamed under the fifth edition OGL, but it's a homebrew world. They have sold their own homebrew books, even. They have a
Mhm.
publishing division now. They have their nonprofit, plus they have, I think, a music division now. They are not a small enterprise, especially with the Vox Machina animated show and the whatever $15 million Kickstarter or whatever it was they did for the show. Um, I don't know what that looks like yet, but from what we've seen of the language, it suggests that Wizards and Hasbro want to go after companies like that as well because they've profited off of their material. Even though, again, I would
But so
argue
have
Critical
you. So
Role,
have
that's the thing, like
you.
they've diverted so many sales of your products for you. I mean, I would argue that Critical Role, along with, say,
Mhm.
there are other streaming people like the Dungeon Dudes and DM Dave and
Yeah.
guys like that. There are a lot of people out there who took fifth edition and pushed it into the spotlight through homebrew and streamed adventures that had nothing to do with Forgotten
Mhm.
Realms or Dragonlance or Eberron or any of the officially licensed Dungeons and Dragons worlds or product identities. So the idea that these companies and entities haven't made Wizards and Hasbro millions of dollars. I mean, there's a reason why, Wizards of the Coast did $1 billion in sales last year, and that's because
Right.
they all of these homebrew enterprises like Critical Role spun up around the OGL and helped make them famous, even though they were using their own homebrew campaigns. So it is interesting because technically, if depending on where they're going with the language, they're going to go after not just if you've made a book and you've sold the book, but anything related to that. Because if you've done that and your book is tied to the OGL, then anything related to that product identity, which they claim is
Hmm.
theirs, if you've published it with their licensing, they're going to be able to tap into all of that. So if you've done a video game, if you've done a TV show, if you've done a animated show, if you've done a YouTube series, here's the other thing: super chat money, Twitch income, bits, subs, all these revenue
Ooh.
streams that
Hmm.
equate to potentially hundreds of millions, if not billions in dollars of lost, as they view it, lost revenue. This is where
Hmm.
things start to get really, really sticky. And I am making supposition at this point because I
Right.
don't know
Right.
that any of the additional stuff has been confirmed in the language, but they have mentioned NFTs and other ways of merchandising that weren't in the original OGL 20 years ago. So everyone is
Hmm.
I've seen a couple people suggest that that was in the leaked documentation. I never saw that in there, so I can't confirm that I know anything about it. I'm just supposing at this point. But yes, I think Critical Role is a company that could be impacted by this if it comes out that this is going to be truly across the board. It's a it's a seriously mind-boggling thing to me as to why they would want to do this, considering how much love they've gotten from all of these communities to help build the D&D brand over the last 10 years. To
Hmm.
suddenly want to throw all that away because you think that there's a way to make that cash cow make even more money, it seems ridiculous to me. um,
Yeah, I just don't under. I hear what you're saying about all the different money streams they could potentially try to plug into to try to make this profitable for them. But I just find it hard to believe they're going to end up making more money if this goes through in the way that it's been leaked. Like if I'm Critical Role, I'm like, oh, you want 25% of my revenue? Fine, we'll start doing the show, except it'll be about cyberpunk. We'll never even mention D&D again. And you've already talked about before on your channel a whole bunch of content creators who have rebranded and who have already completely shifted
yeah,
away from Wizards of the Coast.
DM Dave is now calling himself GM Dave because here's the thing. This is an interesting one because I actually knew this a couple years ago. One of the reasons that our source book doesn't say Dungeon Master, it says Game Master, is because Dungeon Master is an owned trademark by Wizards of the Coast. And I didn't want to deal with any
Mhm.
legal pushback from using the term DM in my game book. So our source book says GM Game Master, and he recently
Mhm.
rebranded to Game Master Dave as opposed to DM Dave to get away from that. But like one of the things that we did is I just went in and stripped everything out. I've done it on all the websites, the Patreon page. I still have to do the source book. That's coming this week. I'm getting that done. That's a few days worth of work is all it is for me. But a lot of people are rebranding and or doing what we're doing, which is stripping everything out that has to do with the OGL, and rather than having it be fifth edition prime, it'll be system agnostic. And so if I was Critical Role, with the power that they have and the fact that they've already got their own sort of hybrid rule set, if I were them, considering they already have a publishing arm, I would just very quickly say, you know what, Wizards, screw you. I'm just going to
Right.
go completely make my own rule set because they have the resources to do that. They've made
That's
plenty of
true.
money, and it might take a year to get an actual source book out to their fans, but that's totally something that someone like they can do because they have the resources. It's a lot easier for someone like me because I'm the one doing all the writing. My wife does all the art, so we don't have to rely on other people to do it. So it's also easy for someone like me. But if you look at a company like Pathfinder, you
Mhm.
hope that they have the resources to want to do that, because they have spent 20 years building up their brand. Um, I would think that's the route that many people are going to choose rather than be bound to these restrictive terms. And even beyond that is the idea of giving up 25% of your revenue, because what no one knows yet is whether or not they're looking at 25% of your gross or 25% of your net. Either way, it's a huge chunk
Ooh.
that they're asking
If
for.
it's 25% of your gross, if they take
Yeah.
25% off the top, That would be just insane. That would probably
There's
kill some companies.
and there's room for argument that that's a punitive um, reaction on their part. And this is one of
Mhm.
the things where I guarantee you there will be some lawsuits that come out of this if they push this. If they really do push this through, I think they're betting on the fact that, oh well, we've got millions of dollars or we'll win any lawsuit. And many they're probably betting on most people will fold and will win the day because we have a bigger lawyer pool than they do. But I think a lot of what a lot of people realize is that, and again, I'm not a legal expert, but I'm one of those. I don't want to say, I'm trying not to be egotistical when I say this. I've
Mhm.
been self-employed for long enough now. I'm 40, almost 43. I've been self-employed since I was 20. I've had a construction company. I've had a travel industry blog and photo production,
Mhm.
video production company. I've done two different game studios. When you know the law, it's much less scary. Legal situations can still be expensive because of court costs and everything else, but you can also, if you have a good understanding of things, represent yourself when you know the law well enough to say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to be, you can't step
Push it
on me.
around. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't step on me. and
Mhm.
and if for the
Mhm.
people who have the backbone and or the resources to go up against this, there will be some lawsuits that come out of this. As I understand it, there's already been one guy. I don't know how legit this is. There's an attorney from a small game studio in Missouri who's already issued a class action warning to Wizards of the Coast
That's what I was
based
about to
on.
say. I'm expecting class action lawsuits. I would expect a bunch of people to come together and say, "No, we can't fight you individually, but we all feel like you have done us wrong and disrespected us. So you're going to have to take us all on at the same time." That's
I
what.
would I would I would think that's probably going to be a likely reality if they push
Mhm.
it through the way it was worded. Now, there's
Yeah,
also the conspiracy out there that this was all a purposeful leak that they did, which I wouldn't understand why they would want to do this, but the idea of
I doubt it.
making a leak public and then stepping back and be like, "Oh, you guys are right. We'll cave. We'll do what you want," and that makes them look like
Mhm.
they're giving in to the, letting other people win. But I wouldn't see why they. I have a hard time with that because why would they attempt to do that when it would damage the brand immediately? Like you've immediately damaged Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast's reputation at this point,
So
um,
actually,
by
speaking
doing
of the
that.
fact that it's damaged the brand, my last question is, do you feel like this will actually turn out to be a good thing? And when I say that, I feel like, as we've already mentioned, a lot of game systems that have come out, especially in the past 20 years, are based on some level on D&D. And now you have a whole lot of creators and people with resources who are saying, I need to figure out a way to get away from D&D and either create something unique or potentially use other gaming systems that are not nearly as well known. Like, I feel like we could potentially see a lot more diversity in what's pushed, not only on the tabletop side, but also in video games as well. Because I feel like a lot of the fantasy games that come out is pretty much based on that D&D rule set. And
Well,
it's only
even
recently. Yeah, sorry, go
yeah. Sorry, go ahead. No, that's my bad. My bad.
ahead.
I got in the way of the
It's
flow, man.
no, it's only recently where we've seen, we've got a couple of Pathfinder games, we've got the Cyberpunk game that came out, and you already talked about the Pillars of Eternity games, but the vast majority of what has been coming out from a fantasy standpoint in the past 20 years is D&D. When you look at the Icewind Dale games, the Baldur's Gate games, Dark Alliance, like it's all based on that rule set.
Even and this is one that popped up in my Twitter feed, and I had to go dig into it because, like, is that really true? Star Wars: The Old Republic 1 and 2,
Yes,
both of those
yes,
games also fell under
yes,
the SRD OGL because they were
yes.
developed by, Black Isle and
BioWare.
Obsidian and
Yep.
BioWare. Yeah, so
Yep.
they had these games that were being developed under the same systems that they were using for their fantasy games.
Exactly.
And it's like that blew my mind when I went, "Holy," and that's another one that blew my mind too, is if you go back and look at all the recent Star Wars role playing tabletop games that have been published, they're all published by Wizards of the Coast under the
Exactly.
OGL, but they're actually published by Wizards of the Coast, not a third party publishing. So that's another weird thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, so many video games, even not just fantasy based, but like Star Wars games and other games. You're
Yep.
right. It's a weird thing. So I think, to answer your question, there are some, like, an old school system like GERDs and stuff, but there are some open source rule sets that I feel like most of them are really obscure. Um, and of course, this could push people in those directions. I know
Hmm.
a lot of people have made some comments on my YouTube videos the last couple of days where everyone's like, "Great, this is going to push more people to Pathfinder," and I'm like, "Yes, but Pathfinder is OGL based, so that's
Exactly.
not
So it's not. It's
necessarily
really not. It's really
it's not
not.
a good thing
Pazzo is
until
going to
we
have to
find
figure out
out."
what they're going to do as well, just like everybody
Yes.
else.
Yes.
Mm-mm.
So someone, only one person has said this, and it was a comment that struck me yesterday. That they were like, all these independent companies should form a conglomerate and get together and say, let's create this like watering hole of third party creators where we can all come together and just throw our stuff in a
Mhm.
pot, and then people can use whatever system they want. And it's a great idea, but the reality of getting everyone to commit to that is, I think, logistically impossible because everyone out there has their preferred system that's not the D20 D&D system. Like they're like, "Oh no, I prefer this one," or
Mhm.
and it's usually some weird obscure thing. It's like the Linux and Mac OS users of the world who are like, there'll be
Mhm.
like you'll have a group of
Hey.
100 people in a room, and there might be two people who
Mhm.
use Linux and five people who use Mac. And it's
Mhm.
kind of like that scenario. It's not that those systems are bad, it's just that there's very few people who use them,
Right.
and so that's the situation that I think tabletop is facing right now. I think a better option, and this is only my personal opinion, but I think the better option is to make source books rule set agnostic, so that like what we're doing with ours is you strip the rules out of it and just make it about story and product identity at that point, and then people can take that story and they can figure out how they want to put it into their rule set however they want. I think
Right.
that's a far more realistic thing for tabletop. However, that is not so easy when you talk about video games,
Right.
because when it comes to programming, you have to have some sort of a system to
Mhm.
program into the game. That you can't just do, like, you have to have lines of code that say this value against this value equals a hit or a miss. Well, where does
Mhm.
that system come from? Is it a D20
Right.
system? Is it a D6 system? Are you making up your own system like Pillars of Eternity, or are you doing something like the Owlcat Games has done, where they're taking literally just the OGL, or things like Solasta, where they're taking the OGL? That's a much more
Right.
complex scenario, and I don't have an easy answer to that because, honestly, like you said, there's not that many other systems out there that are easily usable. And then to
Mhm.
program something from scratch, like what Pillars of Eternity did, that's a huge undertaking. Like
Yeah.
that's a big,
I
big,
mean,
big project.
you brought up Knights of the Old Republic. They used the D&D system for that Star Wars game because BioWare had already created those Baldur's Gate
Yeah.
games. So
So it's literally
they were
copy
already
paste that
familiar.
template.
Exactly. They were already familiar with it. They knew how to implement it and they're like, "Hey, if we just use these mechanics, we can focus on how to get everything else set up like the graphics and the story and how we're going to build up the lore, but we don't have to worry about those underlying mechanics because that stuff is already set and D&D everybody knows that system." I personally thought it was terrible for a Star Wars game. Like a Star Wars game where I swing a lightsaber straight through a person's body and it misses? No. No, this
I'm
doesn't work
also
for me
like,
at all.
I understood like some of the weapons being able to block a lightsaber, but sometimes when you run up against somebody with a sword, it's like my lightsaber should
Come
decimate
on
this
now.
sword.
Come on now. Come on now. Yeah, yeah. So I'm looking forward to somebody else doing a Star Wars role playing game where it's not based on the D&D system. And it's stuff like that where I feel like there's really an overuse of D&D mechanics. Like even though there are definitely some things I don't like about Pathfinder mechanics in comparison, I appreciate being able to play something completely different. Same with Cyberpunk, which was also based on a tabletop game. Like it's a wholly different type of system, and I just appreciate good unique mechanics. And so to me it feels like what's happened now, even though it's going to be unfortunate for a lot of companies, I think that at the end of the day the change, it could cause a lot more creativity and a lot more openness to being able to use
Yes.
systems that otherwise people probably wouldn't have considered.
And there's also something to be said for competition drives, ingenuity. Like when
Yep.
there's stagnancy breeds complacency is what it comes down to. So when everything's always the same, there's never any innovation. So if we're actually in conflict, as bad as that might be, it does
Mhm.
make it stirs the pot, and so friction causes weird things to happen. And so at the very least,
Mhm.
we will probably see some, you know, here's what could happen. And again, none of this is confirmed until Wizards of the Coast actually comes out and says, "Oh yeah, that's actually
Is there
true," or
a
"No,
time
guys."
frame when they're supposed to make a release, by the way?
I was
Or official
I
announcement?
understood what I understood from the leaked documentation was that people were being sent this on the 7th, which was yesterday,
Mm,
and it was going to be coming out mid-month. But I have no way of knowing if that's actually true or not.
okay.
Um, but from what I understand, it would probably be within, even if it doesn't happen this month, I would say Q1 of this year. It sounds to me like they're trying to push it through really quickly, and the fact that they've already got Kickstarter making public statements suggests that they already have all that legal stuff already kind of locked
In
down.
place.
And this leaked document was kind of like the final draft that they were sending out to, fine comb things and fine
Mhm.
tooth comb things. So I would estimate we're probably pretty close to something within the month, I would think. But worst case scenario, it'll probably be within, the next few months we'll see something come out, because um, it seems to be because they made the statement a couple weeks ago. This is coming in the pipeline. Um,
Mhm.
I would think we're pretty close to getting an official announcement. I think at this point everyone is very confused why they haven't made a statement, given the gravity of the situation and the assumptions that are being, because everything you and I are talking about could just be an assumption. It could all be proven wrong.
Right.
Like everything I've talked about on my channel the
Doubtful
last
but
2 3 days.
possible.
Yeah, it's doubtful but possible.
Right.
But the reality is that, I think the best case scenario is going to be companies like Paizo and companies who are big enough to, you know, deal with it, are just going to
Mhm.
say, you know what, let's just make our own system. And in a grand scheme of things, doing that is not a bad thing, because if they develop their own version of an OGL Pathfinder,
Mhm.
they create a whole new rule set and they do it under an OGL because they've always been an open game company, and then they make that version of their system open game available to everyone in the face of Wizards trying to crack down on anybody using the D&D license. That's going to make
Mhm.
Pathfinder be this shining beacon of Paizo, be this shining beacon of hope in a
Mhm.
world of, because a lot of people would move to that and say, yeah. And there's also, Warhammer could choose to go open and make their rule set open. I don't know, maybe it
That
already is.
would be
I don't know enough
wild.
about I don't know enough about Warhammer. So
Mhm.
there are
Mhm.
there are things that could happen because of this. So I mean, it's anybody's guess at this point.
Nice.
But it's going to be very interesting to watch pan out for sure. Because I mean, I look at everybody, not just the tabletop stuff. I look at companies, was it Tactical Adventures who did Solasta? I'm terrified for small companies like that, because
Right.
they're a small business that they're making good money enough to keep a team of, like, 30-ish
Not
people
enough to take a
employed.
25% hit.
No,
Good
not enough to take
lord.
a 25% hit. And that was the thing, this will be, I'm discussing this tomorrow in my 25% royalty video, but one of the things a lot of people f- don't look at is, like, if you think about that for a minute, anytime you're on a Kickstarter, you're immediately taking 50% off the top for taxes, and payment processing fees, PayPal's fee, not PayPal's,
Mhm.
but Kickstarter's fee. All that stuff gets taken off. So you're left with 50% that you're supposed to use for paying your contractors and any sundries that you might have forgotten. Because there's always going to be licensing and other stuff that gets factored in. So that 50% number is really 50 to 60% just gets taken off the top. If you've got Wizards coming in and immediately saying, well, guess what? If you clear $750,000, you owe us 25%. And with Kickstarter, it's going to be 20%. But still, let's
Mhm.
say someone goes with Indiegogo, or there's now some tabletop specific crowdfunding, or let's say you do it independently and you do it on your own through PayPal or something, and they're still going to come in and want that 25%. That means if you raise $1 million, and this is the point I would like to make to people. If you were shooting for $1 million Kickstarter and you knew that you were going to have to give $250,000 of that, assuming it was the gross, you're going to have to give 250 grand to Wizards of the Coast. That's a chunk of change, 250 grand. Rather than pay that out, you could take that 250 grand, contract half a dozen employees, and build your own rule
Make
set
your
from
own damn
scratch.
system. Mhm.
So I think that's the reality that many companies are going to be looking at now, be going like, well, why would I want to give you 25% of my profit when I could just develop it all from scratch? But the catch 22 to that is that the conversation starter that I gave you at the beginning, why did we choose the OGL for 5th edition at the beginning, was because, oh, well, if we do that, we have the brand recognition of being compatible with the world's most, you know,
Right.
prominent system, and so you'll
Yeah.
sell more copies. So there is a
Hmm.
catch 22 to that, of developing your own system from scratch because you don't
I
get the
think
recognition.
I think there's going to be a lot more people now looking for alternative
Yeah.
systems. I think
Ah, well,
there's
I
going to
mean,
be a
it's
lot of people.
interesting times we live in.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Renfail, really appreciate this, man. I think you provided a lot of perspective for those of us like me who didn't really understand the ins and outs of it. So hopefully, my audience will find this all informative and educational. I will leave a link in the description to your channel. But do you want
Thanks, man.
to? Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Do you want to tell people any other links or places where they should find you
Sure.
and support what you're doing?
Most of the stuff I do, I have the gaming channel, obviously, which is the Renfail channel. My wife and I also have a homesteading channel. I'm in a very bare looking office because we bought a homestead at the beginning of last year, and we're in the process of renovating everything from the ground up. So there's that channel, and then of course, if you want to get involved with
What's that
what
channel
we're
called?
building, that's Marginal Boundaries is the name of the other channel. I'll send you
Marginal
links
Boundary.
to all the stuff so
Okay,
you
cool.
can
Yeah, yeah.
drop it
Send
where
me
you
links.
want. And then
Awesome.
we have our Patreon page, which is where we've been building that world behind me, which is the world of Weave in the Void, which is it's a tabletop campaign. It's a point and click adventure game like the old King's Quest, Quest for Glory games, and
Really?
then a book series, kind of like Dragonlance. And we publish all that through the Patreon. Um, yeah, it's we're theoretically pretty close to launch on the point and click. We launched our source book last May, and then we've been live streaming with some of our friends for about a year that campaign on our other channels, on the Weave and Void stuff. And then the book series I've been publishing chapters twice a month for like 2 years, and then we're getting ready to wrap up the first book by March of this year. And then theoretically, we don't know yet if we're self-publishing the point and click or if we're going to go with a publisher at this point because we don't need
Hmm.
development funding. So at this point, my brother and I are just looking at publishers as who's going to give us the
Do the most
best
for you.
marketing,
Hmm.
because we know what we can make self-releasing and doing all the marketing ourselves because we've done it before with other products and we know what we can make kind of there. So at this point, we're just kind of eyeballing different potential partners of saying, what can you do for us? Because we don't really
Right.
need you, but if we could make 50,000 sales with a publisher versus making X amount of sales on our own, that's where we're at right now with it. But there's a demo up that people could download and check all that stuff out. That's the
Awesome.
short version, and I'll send you all
So,
the links to all that
yep.
stuff.
Send me the links. I'll definitely put it in the description. Really, really appreciated this, man.
Sure.
I enjoyed the conversation. Something tells me I'll probably be pulling you back in for
I'm
another
happy,
interview.
man. I'm actually glad we connected the other day because
Sometime.
you were both in the same space at the same time with like CRPGs,
Mhm.
and it was like I'm so happy to find
Yeah,
somebody else who loves CRPGs as much as I do because
absolutely.
it's not everybody out there who likes CRPGs.
Nope.
Like,
Nope.
there's a lot of
Nope.
people who like their RPGs, a lot of people like their MMORPGs,
Mhm.
and a lot of people like their shooters. CRPGs are
Right.
this thing where if you like them, you like them, but not everyone does. So I'd say
That's
fist bump for the
yeah.
CRPGs, man.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah, actually I decided that this was going to be the year that I really wanted to focus on collaboration and trying to find other people in the space that I connect with who, like you said, are in that same realm where we really love CRPGs. So it's already January and I get to connect with a content creator. So I think it's going
It's
well so
awesome.
far. Awesome. All right. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah,
Take
man.
care. See
Thanks.
you the next time.